During the Cold War, the Soviet Union built cars that were never meant for Western roads. Not because they were slow, but because they were considered dangerous. These weren't just vehicles. They were symbols of a different world, built with different priorities. While the West was focused on chrome, comfort, and increasingly safety, the East was focused on rugged simplicity and mass production. This engineering clash created some of the most fascinating and, frankly, hazardous automobiles ever made. Today, we're uncovering the stories of 5 Soviet cars that were so dangerous, they were effectively banned from the West. These are the cars that failed crash tests spectacularly, ignored environmental standards, and put their drivers at risks unimaginable to their Western counterparts. So buckle up, if you can find a seatbelt, as we journey back in time to explore the forbidden cars of the Soviet bloc. Let's start our list with a car that looked innocent enough, but was a death trap on wheels. The ZAZ-965, better known as the Zaporozhets. Introduced in 1960, it was the USSR's answer to the Volkswagen Beetle and the Fiat 500 people's car. But its design had a fatal flaw. The engine was in the back and the fuel tank was in the front, right behind the thin metal of the luggage compartment. In a frontal collision, which is the most common type of crash, the fuel tank was often the first thing to rupture. You can imagine the catastrophic fire risk. Beyond that, the car's body was notoriously weak. It had no crumple zones to absorb impact. The steering column wasn't collapsible, meaning in a crash, it could be pushed back into the driver's chest. It was a recipe for disaster, and safety regulators in the West wouldn't even look at it. It failed every conceivable safety standard of the era. So while it mobilized millions in the Soviet Union, the little Zaporozhets was a rolling hazard that was wisely kept far, far away from Western highways. Next up, a car that actually made it to some Western markets before being hastily withdrawn. The Moskvich 412. On the surface, the 412 looked promising. It had a modern for its time overhead cam aluminum engine and even found success in endurance rallies, which gave it a reputation for toughness. It was sold in the UK and other parts of Europe in the late 60s and early 70s as a budget-friendly family sedan. The problem was, its rally-proven toughness didn't translate to occupant safety. When independent magazines and safety organizations in the West got their hands on it, the reviews were brutal. The brakes were a major point of concern. They were prone to fading under heavy use, meaning the more you used them, the less effective they became, a terrifying prospect on a long downhill road. The handling was described as vague and unpredictable at high speeds, but the final nail in the coffin was its performance in crash tests. The passenger cabin simply collapsed, offering virtually no protection. As Western safety standards became stricter in the mid-70s, requiring things like reinforced doors and safer fuel tank placement, the Moskvich 412 couldn't keep up. Its brief Western adventure ended, and it became another Soviet car banned by regulations. Our third vehicle is a true icon of the Eastern Bloc, the Lada Riva, also known as the VAZ-2105. Based on the 1960s Fiat 124, the Riva was a rolling time capsule. While the rest of the automotive world moved on, Lada kept producing this outdated design for decades. It was a massive export success for the Soviet Union, selling in places like Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. People loved its low price and simple, repair-it-yourself mechanics. But by the 1980s and 90s, its age was a dangerous liability. The car's structure offered almost no protection in side impact or offset frontal crashes. Safety tests from the time showed the A-pillar and roof buckling, and the doors flying open on impact. There were no airbags, no anti-lock brakes, and the seatbelts were rudimentary at best. As crash safety became the top priority for Western regulators, the Lada's ancient design was its downfall. In 1997, it was pulled from all remaining Western European markets because it couldn't meet new, stricter emissions and safety legislation. It was simply too old and too dangerous to be sold alongside modern cars. The Lada Riva wasn't banned for one single flaw, but for being a relic from a bygone era of automotive safety. Now for a car that many in the West have never even heard of, the GAZ-24 Volga. This was the Soviet equivalent of a Ford Crown Victoria or a Mercedes E-Class, a large, stately sedan used by mid-level officials, taxi drivers, and the police. It was big, heavy, and built like a tank. But that's exactly what made it so dangerous. Modern cars are designed to crumple and absorb the energy of a crash, protecting the people inside. The Volga, however, was designed to be rigid. In a collision, it didn't absorb energy. It transferred it directly to the occupants. The interior was a minefield of hard, unforgiving surfaces. The huge metal dashboard, the rigid steering wheel, and the lack of any padding meant that even in a low-speed crash, the risk of serious injury was incredibly high. Its handling was also notoriously poor for a car of its size and weight. It had a tendency to wallow through corners, and its drum brakes were barely adequate for stopping its immense bulk. While it was never seriously intended for export to major Western markets like the US, any attempt would have been stopped cold. It would have failed every single safety and emissions test on the books. The Volga was a symbol of Soviet authority, but from a safety perspective, it was a liability. Finally, we arrive at the most infamous of them all, the Trabant. Built in East Germany, the Trabi wasn't just a car. It was a political statement, and a terrifying one at that. Its body wasn't made of steel, but of a material called duroplasta, hard plastic made from cotton waste and resin. The marketing called it innovative. In reality, it was a product of necessity due to steel shortages. This duroplast body offered zero crash protection. In a collision, it didn't crumple. It shattered, exposing the occupants to direct impact. It also had a nasty habit of catching fire. Making matters worse, the Trabant was powered by a tiny two-stroke engine, similar to a lawnmower. This meant you had to mix oil directly into the gasoline. The fuel tank was located right above the hot engine, with only a gravity feed system, no fuel pump. A leak could drip fuel directly onto the engine, creating an obvious and immediate fire hazard. On top of that, the smoke pouring from its exhaust was a toxic cocktail of pollutants. When the Berlin Wall fell and East Germans drove their Trabants into the West, they were a shocking sight. The car was so unsafe and polluting that it was effectively banned from many Western cities' environmental zones and could never pass the basic safety inspections required for registration. It stands as the ultimate example of a car built in isolation, completely at odds with the safety and environmental standards of the rest of the world. So there you have it, 5 cars from behind the Iron Curtain that were simply too dangerous for the West. From front-mounted fuel tanks to shattering bodies and non-existent safety features, these vehicles tell a fascinating story. They highlight a fundamental difference in philosophy. One side pursuing consumer desire for safety and comfort, the other focused on basic, rugged transportation at any cost. These cars weren't necessarily bad. They were products of their unique circumstances. But when measured against the evolving safety standards of the Western world, they failed spectacularly. They remind us how much automotive safety has advanced and why international standards are so important for keeping us all safe on the road. What do you think? Did we miss any notoriously unsafe Soviet cars? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this trip into automotive history, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. See you next time.